We're now recording.
Thank you. And you don't have a browse pen holder.
I what?
You don't appear to have a browse pen holder.
I do not have a browsy pen holder or browse pen holder, depending on who you ask. I have lots of browsy pens.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so care and maintenance of tools is something that we often kind of tell one another about when we're in meetings and things like that. And oh yeah, that whole COVID thing. So Thea Glass, I think is the full name, had back in March said, "Hey Ian, what about this?" And I never saw it until about 2 weeks ago. And so I want to give her credit for the idea of the class. And specifically, we're going to deal with nibs, and we're going to stick with that for a while. Nibs are wonderful metal nibs is what we're going to deal with. Lots of different kinds. Here we have a C0 speedball. Here is a slightly different size, so about C1. You can kind of see how those are not the same size. This one, as you can see, has green on it. I must not have cleaned it very well. This one is stained black. No, I promise I did clean it well. And then we have Mitchell's and tape nibs and, oh look, a teeny tiny browsy or browse. When I was in Germany, they pronounced it browse. And I went, what? It may have just been that person and their accent. And when I say I was in Germany, I mean I was there for 2 weeks on a honeymoon. So I didn't live there. All of these have some of the same problems and some of the same benefits. But we're going to talk about how to deal with your nib when it's acting funny. Sometimes when you're writing with your pen, you're going to catch a corner and it's going to pull and it's going to be funny and you're going to be like, what the heck is going on here? Sometimes you'll be writing and you'll get striations of no ink. Now, often that means you just need to redip. But sometimes that means that your pen is dragging in some way. There's just all sorts of things that can go wrong. And so we're going to actually talk about the physical properties of the metal. A nib, another way to look at a nib is it's a dull knife. You've got your edge and you don't want it necessarily particularly sharp, but maybe you do. The sharper it is, by the way, the better the hairline will be. You need to keep them clean. If you use a knife enough, the metal will curl up or down. It'll curl to one side or the other of the blade. Same thing will happen with your nib. And so a lot of the problems that come up that if they are not solved by cleaning, which we're going to cover as well, may need to be resolved by sanding or sharpening or modifying your nib. So I have, where to go? There it is. I keep my travel kit in a fishing tackle box. And so this number 4 drawer holds my toothbrushes. You'll notice that some of these toothbrushes are kind of gray. It's because they don't go in my mouth. They go to clean my nibs. You can get any toothbrush you want. They all work. I just recommend going to the cheap dollar store type places and getting a package of the cheapest ones you can find. So for quick cleaning stuff, soap, water, metal, it's okay. Metal and water are like those friends that can hang out with each other and they get along really well, and then about 2 hours later, they're fighting. That's kind of like water and metal. You want to get soap and water on here. You want to clean out the area. You want to rub with the tines because you have those cracks in there. And if you have an attached reservoir, come at it from the top. I'm going to do it from the bottom so you can see. and then brush like that. And you can see how it lifts that attached reservoir, and you just go back and forth. Then you switch it over and go on the other side, and that cleans it out. Rinse it out, dab it dry. If it is not rinsing clear, repeat. Rinse out your toothbrush, add soap, water, do it. What kind of soap should you use? I don't care, as long as it's not a gritty soap. I do highly recommend that you keep it away from strong soaps. Shop soaps, probably not a good idea, but dish detergent, hand soaps, bar or liquid all work. So that's the quick and easy. I shared the video, I have it on my blog. I don't want to spend the whole or a majority of the class talking about how to clean your nibs. If it doesn't have an attached reservoir, it's even easier. Just take the reservoir off, clean them separately. Very simple. So this is a tape nib reservoir. They do come off. If you don't dry them, they will get rusty. And so I've actually kept this one specifically to show people, no, really, make sure to dab dry your stuff. Is this going to hurt the pen or create problems? Probably not, but orange rust is never good. Black rust is good. Orange rust is not. All right. Any quick questions about that? All right.
What's black rust?
It's the stuff that you see on your pans that you take out camping, so that are made out of iron. So the cast iron stuff, those cast iron pans are naturally silver in color, but they're black color because they have a stabilized oxidization or black rust. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's good stuff actually. It's very stable, doesn't like to break down. The red rust will grow and eat, and it's kind of like alive. Not that it is, but it acts that way. All right, so if that doesn't solve the problem with the pen that you're having, I like to grab sandpaper or crocus cloth. And it turns out I'm not a crocus cloth, so I can't show you that. I was a little perturbed when I found that out this morning. But they work exactly the same way. They're both a rough substance. If you want, you can even use shark skin. That's actually something that was used in period. Turns out most shark skin has a grip between 600 and 800, roughly equivalent. So it works out pretty well. And crocus cloth is an interesting parallel to that. What you want to do if you are having problems and you can't figure it out, or one of the things you can do is take your fingernail. I use my thumbnail, but it doesn't matter. And just gently go like this. And if you're catching on the end of this instead of falling off of it, your metal has flipped in. If it's flipped in, that's very unusual, but it happens. If you go this route and it catches, it's flipped the other way. Okay. And it's just created a lip, and that needs to come off. And you can easily do that. Just make sure that you maintain flat and just pull gently a few times and then check it again. And as soon as it comes off, that problem should be solved. That's the easy problem. And you'll notice, even with that small amount of work I did, all of a sudden the tip of my nib is shiny. It should be shiny on both sides. It doesn't take a lot of work with sandpaper to modify your nib. Now, we're not talking about full modifications yet. We'll do that in a bit. Sometimes you actually get a full-on burr, and they often happen on the corners. And so you can pretty much do the same thing. You always want to pull in one direction. You don't want to go back and forth. And that'll pull your burr off eventually. So, any questions about that? All right. So that's probably the quickest, hey, take care of your nib stuff that is quick and easy. Then there's other things that can happen. If you push down on your nibs, you will notice that they will spread. Now, some nibs the bigger they are, they will still spread pretty well. If they're not spreading at all, and you notice that one had debris that came off of it, haven't cleaned this one, did that on purpose. So I wanted to show you how the difference in how it looks, which means this gets a real thorough cleaning later.
If I can just interject, the degree, the one thing that people need to remember is the type of ink that they are using will often dictate how often they need to clean their nibs.
Yep.
For example, if you're using Indian inks or Chinese Sunni inks as a permanent ink, they have a shellac in them and really need to be cleaned. Some people will say as often as every 10 to 15 minutes while you're doing your work. Otherwise, they will go out very quickly.
I recommend using vodka to clean those. And yes, every 15 minutes has been every 10 to 15 minutes has been exactly my experience. Most of the inks that we use, and they're gorgeous, by the way, they really are, you get some gorgeous things from them. But usually you always, when you get done using your nib, clean it, at the very least, rinse it off quickly and use a paper towel to dry it. But please, toothbrush and soap is so much better. You'll have much better quality stuff. Where was I going? Oh, so one of the things that can happen is that we've seen it open like that, but sometimes we'll get this, where one tine is sticking out. Now I'm doing that on purpose. I'm pushing it that way, so it'll do it. Sometimes that happens because we were pulling down and it caught and we pushed down, not knowing what happened, and it kind of springs out. And just like any other, so I called them a knife, and at the end they are, but they're also like springs. In fact, spring metal is something that gets used. And so it gets bent out of shape and it might stay that way, or it might come up and get caught on the tine next to it. If that happens for me, the first thing I do is go ahead and press it down so it'll spread out. And then whatever direction it's, if it's curling up, I flip it over and push it down and try and get it back into shape. The thing to remember is metal fatigue is a thing. You might be able to get it to work back in space for long enough to get it to work for what you're working on. Go get a new nib. If it's bent that much, your chances of it coming back to work for you are not very good for very long. If it's just been caught up and over, you'll probably be okay. But if it's truly bent, you need to get a new nib. I'm sorry, it happens. Where was that going? Right. Some people say, oh yeah, pull it down and make sure you clean in between them. No, don't do that. You don't need to. You're just asking to create damage. So somehow I got knocked off my line of what I was going to do. All right, so any questions so far about what we've seen? So nib care does not have to be complicated, but understand that you're dealing with the metal stuff, and that metal will eventually create little lips. There we go, little lips. Say that 3 times fast. And so that's why the sanding here and the sanding here helps. The thing is that in my experience, speedballs develop lips faster than browsies. Browsies tend to not develop lips hardly ever. It's a stiffer metal, and so it doesn't do it as much. Mitchell's almost as fast, but not quite as fast. And I haven't had a tape nib do it to me yet, but I don't use tape nibs a lot. But any metal nib, you can have that problem. Now let's talk about modifications. Modifications versus maintenance. If I'm just doing this to clear it off, I do it lightly, I do it gently, and I do it very carefully. And eventually that'll come off. And once I have that lip come off, I want to go on the other side just once or twice and make sure it doesn't create a new lip on the other side. when we cut quills to switch sides, one of the last things you do when you're cutting a quill is sharpen the tip. And that's a 45 to 60 degree cut from the top forward to the tip. And that creates a very much a wedge in the nib. So if that's our nib here, and normally it's like that, that cut turns it into that. And so now you have, and this is the underside, you have a much thinner point. Between this and this, pretty easy to tell which one's going to give you a better hairline mark when you're doing the thin hairline moves. It's going to be this one. However, it does come with some potential problems. That's thinner than this one. This is going to wear out faster, isn't it? Well, you can do the exact same thing that done to the quills with this final cut to your nibs. And you can do that simply by sanding it. Somehow, when I was taught this, I was taught do it like this. Yeah, notice this is the top and this is the bottom. When we start talking about the interaction of ink with our nibs, we start having to deal with surface tension of our ink. And surface tension is what creates the little balls. We put it on here, we do this, and it comes off. And if we're not careful, it'll create blobs. If I sharpen this in a way where it's not this, but it's, oh, come on. The grit got under it. So it's like this, and this is the bottom. The ink's going to come down this way, and it's just going to create a ball under here, and you're actually going to get more blobbing. So don't sharpen from underneath. Sharpen from above. So the ink comes here, conforms to the very tip, and it stays nice and thin. Have I confused anyone yet? I will take that as a no. So if you want to get your metal nibs, and the complaint with metal nibs is that you don't really get nice hair thin lines. Take your nib, and if you want, you can put it in a pen holder and do it this. I prefer not to have it in a pen holder because I feel like I have more control. Whether or not I do is probably a matter of opinion. I'm sure somebody out there's worked this out. But you want to hold your pen at a 45 to a 30 degree angle. So if the paper's here, I want to get that top 45, 30 degree angle. What that'll do is give me a 60 degree to a 45 degree on the tip. Which one's better? I don't know that there's been studies done on that. I don't know. I know I prefer a 60, but I don't know that that's better. What I do know is when I sharpen these, they get a lip a lot faster, so I have to do more maintenance later on. So I hold it with my middle finger underneath, and I just pull it. How long do you need to pull this? Now this is 400 grit paper. You probably would rather use 600 to 800 grit paper, even 1,000, although 1,000 gives you a shiny mirror finish, and that takes a very long time. Use metal, and if you want, go ahead and wet it, because metal sandpaper is the black sandpaper, and you can wet it. And you can see that that's starting to sharpen. You probably, almost certainly, want to keep it off and away from the end of your reservoir. So if it's attachable reservoir, go ahead and take it off. I've had this take as little as 5 minutes. I've taken as long as half an hour. No, I didn't do the half an hour in one full setting. I don't recommend doing that to all your nibs. I recommend doing it to 2 or 3 and then they be your ones that have been sharpened and you use them less often. But that's just my opinion. Yeah, something really knocked me off my base. I should have had notes ready for me in case that happened. Any questions about this so far? Or any comments? All right. So the next thing that we can talk about for maintenance stuff, we've done a lot of talking about the nib because the nib is the thing that we end up working with and thinking about the most. We also have our pens and our pen holders. You can kind of see that this nib holder has a little bit of off color on it. There's a little bit of rust in there. You'll also notice that there's a whole lot of ink around that spring and this area. That means that the spring's lifetime is shorter than it otherwise would be. And this is why you don't dip all the way in. It gets in here and this is almost impossible to clean. Now, you can take these out. That was quite the revelation to me when I first did it, when it was first shown to me. And they look like this. And you can definitely see that this has rust on it. So if you have to, then you can come in here and you can clean this off and use a toothbrush. And use sandpaper. Or spend 20 cents and get a new one. So if you see that, having that rust, by the way, rust transfers. So make sure you're cleaning these really well. If you do end up having one, you have to keep using it. And I do recommend every once in a while taking out the pen holder, the spring that's in here, and it's called the pen insert, and pulling them out and cleaning things out and looking inside and see if you have anything growing in there. One time I did that, I found that I had mold. So that's not good for your pen holder at all. And it's not unusual to have pen holders end up having ink on them. I mean, you don't even have to dip all the way in. It just has to get on your fingers and then you're doing this and it seeps in and under. So it's just a good idea to pull these out as part of, once a month, every 3 months, 6 months maintenance is to just pull them out and take a look at them. You can see that this one doesn't have rust on it. Any questions about any other tools and stuff?
No questions in chat.
All right. So this is a chopstick holder. That is all this little thing is. That chopstick holder is very, very useful for doing that. It stops your pen from rolling away. And it keeps it off of whatever substance it is on. So if you are working flat, this helps keep your pen from accidentally making marks on your paper when you're setting it down. It'll also stop from making marks in the area off your paper, so that when you actually brush it and pick it up on your clothes and then you brush across, you make a big mark on your paper. I'm sure nobody here's ever done that because, we're all fastidious, right? Yeah, okay, it's a good thing you're all muted. So yeah, they're handy. You can usually pick them up for $1, at any place where you can get chopsticks. Maybe less, depends on where you're at. But this is actually part of, in my opinion, this is part of maintenance to me. This is part of good care because it helps keep your area clean, which means your project or your practice that you're working on stays clean too, and everything works out well. And along those lines, I just wanted to show everybody my absolute favorite eraser. Moo, just like the cow. They come in packs of 2. I've never seen them come in less. And that's what they start off as. And the fun thing about these is when they erase, they do this. And you get all these little crumblies on them. And all that junk that you just erased is often caught up in here. And so, yeah, either have canned air or a horsehair brush nearby, and you're going to need to brush them off. There's a lot of them. But that's my absolute favorite. I love the kneaded erasers. I'm not going to tell you they're bad. There's all sorts of different erasers out there, but this happens to be my favorite. And as far as I'm concerned, that's all I have for today. That went a lot faster. I expected more questions.
Another suggestion for a pen holder, Ian.
Sure.
If anyone knows any lamp workers that make beads, if you have them string 3, 4, 5 beads together and lock them in place, that makes a perfect pen holder.
Neat. That would, wouldn't it?
That's a
What
really
is that?
cool idea, Tellius, and I like that idea. That would be some really cool pen holders.
I have a couple of them that a friend of mine on the coast, who's a lamp worker, has made for me. So the other thing that I was going to say, Ian, is that with toothbrushes, if you're in the habit of using regular toothbrushes as opposed to battery or electric ones or whatever,
Right.
and an old toothbrush that's just starting to go, so you're replacing it, rather than put it in the garbage, recycle it to your calligraphy kit, because you'll still get quite a bit of wear out of it as a pen cleaner or a nib cleaner. So you don't actually have to go out and buy a brand new one. You can recycle your old ones.
Yep. I have a toothbrush that I had from before I started doing calligraphy, and it was dying. So I decided, okay, fine, I'll start using that one and go get myself a new toothbrush. I started doing that back in 2005. I still have that toothbrush. It is at my sink waiting for me to clean a nib with it still. I just happen to use, for me, I go out and I buy them because they become Scribal largesse.
Another trick, and I will try to take a photo of mine and post it to the group. If you take the flap on a cardboard box and cut it off and cut it into about 1.5 inches wide to 2 or 3 inches long, it's corrugated, so it has I'm trying to think of the word. The inside of it is like a ups and downs. It's got holes in it. Your nibs will fit inside those little holes on your cardboard, and you can actually. So I store my nibs by sets on these little cardboards, so they're not rattling around in a box and getting damaged during travel. They sit snugly in these little corrugated holders, and because I cut them 1.5 to 2 inches wide, I can put nibs on both ends of the cardboard. And I can write on the cardboard the nib sizes, so I have all that information in front of me.
I had never seen that or heard of that. That is awesome. I love that idea. Another one I'm going to be stealing from you.
As a combat scribe, I generally travel with what I call my nib inventory, and I have 2 or 3 sets of the Speedball and Browse nibs in it, plus specialty nibs, so that if I run into a problem when I'm doing Scribal work at an event, all I need to do is to go and pull up another set to pick up that nib to replace the one I'm having issues with. So what happens is when I go to restock my nibs, I just have to look at my cards to see which ones are missing because I write the sizes on them and I can quickly do a nib order.
And that is far faster than this and far less fiddly and apparently less damaging.
Yes. And it's particularly good for things like crow nibs and stuff like that, the really fine ones. Because the thing about nibs is, and we all forget, we all tend to, particularly when we're learning calligraphy, to put too much pressure on our nibs. The finer the nib, like the crow nibs, the faster you will bend your nib and damage it. And so again, the same thing with when you're using the sandpaper, you need a very light hand to do it.
Very light.
Which is consistent with calligraphy, because it's the one thing that I tell most of my calligraphy students is you need to learn to hold your pen so that it's resting on the paper, not pushed into the paper.
Yeah. And that's hard for us because we use ballpoint pens.
Yes. And
this is what happens when you improperly clean your nib.
oops.
The attached reservoir eventually, will come off if you try to lift it. It's, just metal fatigue.
Mhm.
So this is the first C1 nib I ever had. And I don't have the nib anymore, but the whole pressing down too hard, I had a nib do this to me because I was pushing down too hard on it.
Mhm.
So yeah.
I've actually bent crow nibs like 30 to 40 degrees.
It's not coming back from that.
No.
I always hate it when you're like, I have to throw out this nib. And in the end, nibs are anywhere between $1 and $5 each. It's not the end of the world, but I still absolutely hate it.
But when you're doing scribal work, particularly if you're doing combat scribe, which is being a scribe at an event, adding names and what have you, during a reign, I average one complete set of nibs, the equivalent to one complete set of nibs. So there's 6 to 8 nibs in every set. And at the end of each reign, I have to replace the equivalent to 6 to 8 nibs. You're looking at even the ones that are just a couple of dollars, you're looking at $20 to $25 for a set of nibs.
If for some reason you can't find sandpaper, files do work, but oh geez, make sure that you use the very needle type files that are, designed to be very, very gentle.
The other trick using sandpaper is if you're having an issue with the corners of your nib catching or cutting, so the little corners on the edges. I don't know. Do you know how to, Ian, to roll your point on sandpaper? No, not that way. Put your point on the paper like that. No, the first way you had it. What you're going to do is put it on the point. One point. Pick the left or the right point, not the foot. That's it. Now, what you're going to do is pull it across the sandpaper, and you're going to roll the nib so that you're doing an arc.
Yep.
And what that does is it rounds your corner. So when you're doing things like fracture, which has a lot of fins in it, they're upward strokes. And so you're rolling up onto the corner of your nib and pulling it up. If it's too sharp, it will cut or drag. And you can alleviate that by half a dozen times, just simply rolling the corner across sandpaper, and it will take the tip of the point off.
Yeah, and if your nib is cutting into the paper, it's actually cutting fibers, and that is drawing ink into the under fibers of the paper, and that creates its own issues. You do want to avoid that.
something I saw, I think it was on the that British scribe's YouTube site, is he was using not sandpaper, he was actually using what looked like a sharpening stone for a knife. So
Yes.
for like 1,000 to 1,000.
Yeah, Paul Antonio Scribe, or Paul, or yeah, he is, he much prefers using sharpening stones, and the sharpening stones he used has, if I remember right, equivalent of 800 to 1,000 grit.
Yeah.
Yep. Anything that will sharpen metal will work. I had somebody ask me, well, can I use a belt sander? I wouldn't.
It'd be overkill by a lot.
Yeah. Could you? Yes. I think it'll destroy your nib. I haven't tried.
Had a nib, oops, now it's gone.
It went shooting across the shop.
And you can pick up those sharpening stones. Most sharpening stones have two sides to them, but you can pick up small ones that are just a couple of inches long by 1 inch or 1¼ inches wide or tall, however you want to look at it, at hardware stores or sports stores, because they're often kept by fishermen to sharpen their blades. So they have small ones that are quite effective.
And make sure that you're using a sharpening stone and not a shaping stone. A shaping stone's purpose is to take off a lot of metal and shape that blade or shape the metal that you're using. A sharpening stone's purpose is to modify the shape that is there to get it sharper. They're two entirely different purposes, but if you don't know the difference, make sure that you're looking for that you look at a sharpening stone instead of a shaping stone. They should be labeled differently. That said, if you want to shape your, you know, okay. Yeah, this is one of the reasons why maintenance of your stuff is done at events or at practice nights, because we can always kind of look at it and do things and show stuff. And it's just not something that I've ever seen done before virtually in a class. Mr. Tong, Paul, he does great videos, and I'm still trying to figure out how he does such good stuff, but he knows what he's doing far better than I do. That's probably a lot of it.
The one thing, Ian, that we didn't touch about was the ink itself.
That is true.
So often, as I do, I will, rather than carrying the large bottle of ink, I will transfer them into smaller airtight containers to travel with me, because that way in my travel kit, I can have 2 or 3 different colored inks, black and red and blue, for example, in smaller quantities, but they're in airtight containers. The risk is that they will thicken. If they're a water-based ink, that's not a problem. You can just simply add some distilled, and I stress the word distilled water, a drop at a time until you get it to the right consistency. If you're finding that it doesn't flow well, you can add a drop of, I believe, gum arabic, liquid gum arabic to it, which will increase the viscosity of your ink, which allows it to flow at the right thickness or consistency, but it will flow a little bit more smoothly if you're thinking that it's a bit thin. When you're dealing with permanent black inks, particularly if you're using Sumi or Indian ink, and I honestly don't recommend Indian ink, most of it has too high of a shellac percentage in it, so it gets thick and gums up your nibs far too quickly. Moon Palace is probably my favorite Sumi ink, if you're looking for a particular recommendation for a brand. It's the one that was recommended to me by 3 different modern master calligraphers, and I do love it. But it is a little bit harder. I do use distilled water if I find it's getting slightly thick on me, to thin it out a little bit, and that generally works. But again, you're using very small quantities. So.
like drop by drop.
Mhm.
What are you using for your small waterproof travel containers?
I have actually acquired some time ago special little glass bottles that look like miniature ink wells that have corks in them. And so the corks have been dipped in paraffin, and then I seal them that way because you can warm the paraffin up and it will seal around the top of the glass container. But if you check dollar stores, for example, you can find airtight miniatures relatively easily.
When traveling with ink, I highly recommend double bagging. Get a zip top bag,
Mhm.
knock all the air out of it after you put your ink in there, zip it closed. And then make sure that that goes in Ziploc top down. And then to the zip top on the other side, make sure you knock the air out of that one too. The ink can't flow around as well. And sometimes a bag didn't get closed all the way or opened up. If you leave air in the bag, it is a lot easier for that bag to get open simply by pressure on it. Especially if you're going to go up in elevations, because that air will expand because less pressure on the outside. So yeah, make sure you knock all the air out of the bags.
And you can cut a straw in half, and then you can zip it closed till there's just enough room to get the straw in, and you literally can vacuum seal it by sucking the air out, pinching it and pulling the straw out and locking it.
Yeah, we're not kidding.
There
But
is
at the very
nothing
least,
worse
double
than,
bag.
there is nothing, absolutely nothing worse than getting to an event, opening your travel Scribal kit up, only to find that everything is covered in ink and you have this horrendous mess on your hands. So things like your sandpaper and your erasers and all of those soft items in your kit are garbage. You will probably have to clean most, if not all, of the nibs in your kit because they will have had this stuff all over it. It will get wherever it is that you least want it to get. Anything that you can do to protect it. The other thing that I often do when I'm traveling, unfortunately I don't travel much by air, I generally drive, is I actually package my ink bottles for the trip separate from the rest of all of my other calligraphy gear, so that all I'm doing is getting ink on ink bottles and not on all of my other stuff. After the first time it happened, it was like 2.5 hours of trying to get all this stuff cleaned up to use.
It's a lot of fun at an event to clean your stuff for 2.5 hours.
Yeah, do not recommend it.
Yeah, 0 out of 10, let me tell you.
And of course, in most cases now, you cannot travel with ink because ink bottles hold like 2.5 ounces, which exceeds the TSA's rules governing liquids, which is the other reason why I try to find something that will only hold about 1/2 ounce or something, because those are allowable.
Okay, guys, I hate to tell you this, but we're almost running on 40 minutes. So I'm going to stop recording now.